Hello and welcome to McKinsey Live. I'm Lucia Rahili, McKinsey's editorial director and your host for today's special event, a preview of the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, poised to take place next week in Davos, Switzerland. Quick heads up that today's Davos preview is a little different from other events in this series in that we're not zeroing in on a single area of new research. Nevertheless, you can access recent publications on all the topics we'll talk about today by visiting our website, mckinsey.com. And as always, feel free to use the Q&A bar if you have questions on today's discussion. We've got a big group in the audience today. Lots of interest again in Davos this year, but we will do our best to answer a selection of your questions at the close of this event. Joining us today to talk about what to expect from Davos 2026 are McKinsey senior partners, Tracy Francis and Yuito Yamada.
Thanks, Lucia.
Tracy is based in Brazil. She serves as McKinsey's managing partner for Latin America, focusing on accelerating sustainable and inclusive growth in the region and on enhancing Latin America's global profile. And Yuito is based in Tokyo. He leads regional efforts on sustainability and agriculture, and he serves companies on a range of related topics, including sustainability transformation, portfolio decarbonization, and green business globalization. Tracy and Yuito, welcome to McKinsey Live.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for making the time. With Davos looming to talk with us today, recognize that it's busy. Let's get rolling with some context. Thousands of global leaders and decision makers are slated to gather at Davos next week to grapple with the priorities for the year ahead. Presumably there will be plenty to talk about, given that 2026 has started out not uneventfully. Tracy, you are a veteran of Davos at this point and will, of course, be in attendance again this year. What do you expect leaders to really want to home in on, and how does that track with the formal agenda for the meeting this year?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here. It's very interesting, right? If you think about what's happened in a year, right? Last year, the very first day of Davos, the Monday, was the day of the US presidential inauguration. And so there was a lot of expectation, uncertainty, but sort of, quite I would say, at least from the North American very positive atmosphere, and from, other parts of the world, a bit of a wait and see. The other theme that was super strong last year, as you can imagine, the DeepSeek model had just been launched. And so there was real questions around what does that mean? I think this year we see continuation and sort of a grounding of some of those themes. And so if you think about the formal WEF agenda, so the World Economic Forum agenda, they talk about cooperation in a more contested world, which makes all the sense sort of a year in or a year later, let's say. And by the way, this question of geopolitics has been on the agenda for quite some years now. So that's the first one. The second one is around for the WEF is around deploying innovation and scale responsibly, and that sort of coupled with unlocking new sources of growth, I think is something that most business leaders are excited about. Building prosperity within planetary boundaries is on their agenda, as is investing in people. And so what we always do each year in McKinsey is we say, okay, where do we have something that's really distinctive to contribute? And so we have looked at that agenda and sort of honed in on where we think business leaders have real areas of interest and where we have distinctive contributions. And so for us, a couple of themes as well. The first one for us is agentic AI transformation. And that is very much, if last year was, okay, DeepSeek, this year, I think there's very little doubt now that companies are moving on this topic. It's a question of, okay, agentic is the next level. We are also focused on 21st century leadership, which is, very much around developing leaders developing today's leaders for kind of tomorrow's needs. Geopolitics, as I mentioned, very much lined up with the WEF agenda there, and how do business leaders equip themselves given ongoing uncertainty? Resilience and growth have been themes for us for many years and continue to be relevant. And then finally, the question of brain economy, which we'll get into a bit in this session, and I think is one of the most interesting themes that we are focused on.
Great, thanks, Tracy. So let's get into a bit more detail about these themes and why they're top of the agenda for leaders. And let's start with, as you said, agentic AI, perhaps, singularly consequential as a disruption. It's been a few years since Gen AI tools rolled out broadly in the marketplace and rocked all our worlds and increasingly our workplaces. What are the key points of discussion now for business leaders when it comes to AI?
Yeah. So this is super interesting, right? It's kind of a 3-year arc in some ways. I remember 3 years ago, it was, wow, ChatGPT, the model that kind of took the world by storm had just been launched. Last year was DeepSeek. This year, I think the conversation will very much be around agentic AI transformation. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is, the value at stake, we believe, continues to be enormous, right? If you just focus on the US, it's kind of almost $3 trillion of value at stake. If we could really rewire organizations around people, agents, robotics, and those themes. So that's the sort of the opportunity continues to be enormous. I think what we're also seeing is the majority of companies are still not getting results where they can measure profit from their efforts in this area. And so a real conversation around what does it take? And then perhaps the third element is that we see that for people within organizations, right, given that organizations are made of humans, we see that employees are using and experimenting with these tools and are really ready to go and, are almost, imploring their employers to think about what is the way that you actually drive to scale. And perhaps here, our push is for leaders to, in some ways, I guess, catch up with that momentum. So, adoption very much on the agenda for us. How do you make adoption actually add value through operating model shifts, cultural shifts? What do new org structures look like in a world where an org chart is made of humans and agents? And then I think the topic of robotics will probably come to the fore this year as well.
Okay, so let's pick up on the adoption point you made, Tracy. Obviously, critical top leadership teams need to find ways to embrace AI adoption as a shared responsibility, given the operating environment. It's fair to posit that being a leader today is more complex than it's ever been. Yuito, let's bring you in. What are some examples of mindset shifts or of skills that leaders need to hone to meet the challenges of this particular moment?
No, thanks a lot for having me as well. This is very exciting. As you can all feel this theme, right? The demands on leaders have never been more challenging than before. The new geopolitical world, changes in trade policy, supply chain issues. We saw this in 2025, but above all, artificial intelligence, key leaders, these are some of the key issues that key leaders are facing. And 10 years ago, CEOs and top teams typically focused on 4 or 5 critical issues at any given point of time. Today, that number has basically doubled, right? And McKinsey has found out that 6 leadership traits are needed to excel in this uncertain environment, and that's positive energy, balance and personal inspiration, servant selfless leadership, continuous learning, and basically a humble mindset, right? Grit and resilience, levity and stewardship. Back actually in the 1980s, one of the former McKinsey global managing partner, Ron Daniel, defined the term leadership factory. And it's a term to describe McKinsey's approach in which leaders invest their time in other colleagues, providing regular feedback, share personal and collective insights, resulting in an outcome of producing basically great leaders. So in the present day, what is the way to create these, leadership at speed and scale is basically the topic. And we analyze that there's like 4 steps. First, to engage with the absolute high potentials and get them in the field quickly. Based on McKinsey's research, the top 5 to 7% of the talent generate up to 40% of the leadership bench over a decade, but only if they are identified and stretched early enough. That's one of the topics. Secondly, is to champion new approaches in risk-taking and learning. For example, fail fast, learn faster culture encourages people to innovate and grow. And our studies show that companies that explicitly reward and incentivize intelligent risk-taking are actually 2 times more likely to create top quartile innovators. We found this out recently as well. And thirdly is to shape and own these high impact innovations from really at the very, very top. We've seen when the CEO and the top team actively sponsor leadership development, outcomes improve by more than 50% versus only HR-led type of program. So it's almost like a real top kind of job that this gets possible. And then the fourth one, and finally, simplifying and really rewiring the organization for faster decision making. Companies that really systematically remove low value approvals and rituals see quite some measurable productivity gains even within 6 to 9 months. So I don't think I think that the best leadership factories really don't wait for the next generation of leaders to appear, but they identify them early, stretch them, remove these basic decisions off their table, and really led by personally the CEO and the top of the house. This is what we've been seeing recently in this topic.
Thanks, Yuito. Let's turn now to geopolitics. As Tracy mentioned, this has been a standing issue for the past several years, but it's obviously a headline issue again in these early weeks of 2026. Ironically, in some ways, the world has never been more connected, right? We've seen a big jump, for example, in cross-border flows of intangible assets. Data flows have grown nearly 50% annually over the past 2 decades, but geopolitically tensions are continuing to escalate as we've just witnessed vis-a-vis Venezuela, et cetera, and the global order continues to recalibrate and shift. Tracy, I would love your point of view here, always, obviously, but in particular in that, again, despite your charming Australian accent, you are based in Latin America. What are some of the key imperatives for CEOs within this very uncertain geopolitical context?
Thanks for the question. As you know, this is a topic I'm very passionate about, having spent parts of my career all around the world. It's super interesting, right? And I think over the last year, there's been a lot of focus on tariffs, obviously. I think at the start of this year, as you alluded to, Lucia, there's obviously been, quite a lot of discussion around interventions and a conversation that's gone beyond tariffs. But what I think we're very focused on and what we see our clients very focused on is how to respond to these changes that you talked about, right? On the one hand, a massive increase in terms of information flows and an understanding that some of the biggest problems around the world actually need global cooperation to be solved. On the other hand, real tangible changes in supply chains that, by the way, we have observed over multiple years, right? This is not a recent phenomenon. Mm-hmm. We see, of course, the question of tariffs. US-China tariffs have risen 6-fold. Global trade interventions have grown 12-fold since 2010. We see industrial policy really changing at scale, which industries are viable, in which places. We see, $2 trillion worth of subsidies around the world since 2020. That is a 5 times increase, right? Sometimes it's hard to dimensionalize these trillions, but a 5 times increase in terms of subsidies, tax breaks, and incentives is obviously extremely meaningful. We see $14 trillion of trade shifting around the world with investments in different manufacturing footprints, different supply chains, and it goes on, right? I can cite a bunch of scary numbers. Having said that, what we are seeing is, first of all, right, our clients have become quite, I would say, conversant in geopolitics, right? Every investment decision is being made with these questions in mind. Most, top conversations, top team conversations are contemplating this question as well. And what we really see is a need to plan for two worlds, right? One world where regionalization and fragmentation dominates, cross-border trade, restrictions intensify, capital flows move around quite significantly, and real strategic choices around where to operate, become very, very critical. That is one world. There is a second world, which is where, diversified world, trade is rebalanced, but still broadly open, and new corridors for investment and, industrial cooperation go on. And the reality is, we need to plan for both of those worlds because it's not clear which way things are headed. And so we see a lot of scenario planning, right? Scenario planning is now kind of de rigueur as organizations are thinking about this idea of how do you build your geopolitical muscle within organizations, be it through ecosystems or be it within the organization is absolutely critical. And knowing kind of where to invest and when is a critical competency. I think we will see that this topic, continues to be strongly on the agenda. I think we have now, some understanding of where tariffs will play out, but of course, things are unpredictable, and I think the discussion is very much now around how do companies make this real in their day-to-day planning and operations.
Okay, that's super helpful. And it's a good reminder, I think, vis-a-vis scenario planning and so forth, that while the world can seem volatile, there continue to be clear opportunities for growth for organizations with the right capabilities and the right people in place and having done the right preparation. Yuito, talk to us about how business leaders should be thinking about resilience and growth in 2026 and beyond.
And this is very much connected to some of the themes that Tracy has mentioned, but we've done quite some granular research together with the World Economic Forum on this. And definitely Davos this year is also, growth, innovation, resilience is a topic. Organizations are becoming more kind of resilient, but somewhat progress means kind of uneven from what we have observed. Only 1 in 4 companies considered itself ready to cope with disruption across all resilience dimensions. And most companies focus on relatively short-term fixes rather than building fundamental resilience capabilities and muscles, such as foresight, scenario planning, and proactive risk management. We actually found out that 13% of sample companies embed resilience KPIs comprehensively into their strategy. So it's not a lot. So what is kind of required in this extremely unpredictable environment, and how does technology emerge in that, right? We've looked this through with the forum, and 3 strategic priorities going forward that top management really could work on. First is move from static risk limits to simulation-driven decision-making at scale. And in the near future, people would start to embed thousands of forward-looking simulations into every major strategic decision, whether it's M&A, market entry, capital allocation, even like using digital twins of balance sheets and operation. I think that's to the extent that technology might emerge. And the second is replacing periodic risk reviews with continuous real-time portfolio monitoring. Basically, kind of leaders who still rely on monthly reports are already behind this resilience muscle development. And people would need to basically eliminate batch reporting and move to always-on monitoring, right? With intubation only by like exception, where humans step in only when thresholds are basically breached out, right? And then thirdly, to push automation at scale and only deploy humans for really real judgment. And the future resilience function, we found out, will not hire more controllers, but hire basically thinkers, right? And what I mean by this is, automate 80 to 90% of routine kind of risk work. AI and automation would manage routine exposure monitoring, pattern detection, and then really deploy human capacity towards oversight, judgment, and ethics. And in practice, these resilience functions are evolving towards a smaller core team made up of deep domain experts, whether it's credit, cyber, climate risk experts, AI trainers and model challenge who stress test algorithms, and then ethics and accountability stewards who ensure transparency and accountability in the decision making. So that's what we kind of observe. Resilience is no longer like an uncertainty management, but it really became like a central driver of strategic advantage that we see in this team, who would actually win through some of these volatile times that partially Tracy was referring on the geopolitics theme.
Thanks, Yuito. So let's move, speaking of technology and developing capabilities and so forth, to talk about the brain economy, which is a topic that McKinsey is bringing to the Davos discussion table this year. Tracy, why is McKinsey bringing this particular topic to a business forum?
Yeah. So it's sort of, on the one hand, a good question. On the other hand, if you just listen to the first part of this podcast,
right.
But more seriously, right? If you think about what we believe, right? Yes, we're in this moment of, not moment, right? We're now in it for some time, right? A period of, a lot of uncertainty, a real need for resilience, shift to AI, and that type of these types of trends. On the other hand, we actually, as McKinsey, believe that human potential is more important than ever in order to navigate, in order to have good judgment, in order to create aspirations at the appropriate level, and in order to be healthy and achieve human potential. And so this question of the brain economy is an area of real focus for us. We have a what we call a think and do tank called the McKinsey Health Institute, and this is an enormous area of investment for us. And what's super interesting is, I sort of talked in a more lofty way about why we are bringing this. If you also think in a very pragmatic way, the levels of burnout, of low engagement, of absenteeism for companies, and by the way, also labor shortages, very, very costly for individual companies and for our overall society. And so, of course, we're McKinsey, we love to do the numbers on these types of things. But if you just think about, a sort of a mid-sized company, there are real opportunities, right? If you were to take a sort of a 10,000 employee company and work out, if you applied sort of average rates of burnout and of absenteeism, the opportunity for a company to improve interventions is in the millions, right? 22 million, right? In terms of annual losses reduced or addressed. And then if you extrapolate that to global GDP, the numbers are enormous, right? When we run, again, using known interventions to improve brain health, we look at numbers that are in excess of 10% of global GDP. Having said that, when you look at investment and say, okay, well, this seems like something super important, and we imagine that governments and organizations are really focused on this. When we look at the spend on mental health, it is extremely low, right? We are talking low single digits. So on the one hand, a quarter of the issue is caused by brain health, issues. On the other hand, less than single digits investments. And so what we are trying to do is, one, raise this as an issue, make it clear that this is important in a world of AI and in a world of geopolitics and in a world of resilience and growth. And second of all, to be clear that, we don't need to, reinvent everything, right? There are a lot of known interventions that can be brought to bear that would give immediate impact at the organization level and at the overall economy level.
Fascinating. And as you said, increasingly vital as we move into this new era, this new AI economy. Okay, I am mindful of time and we have been inundated with questions, so I'd love to squeeze in at least a couple before we close. I think I'm going to stick to the high-level questions just for broad audience relevance, although we've had quite a few specific ones that are interesting too. Tracy, let's start with you. Tell us, if there is one wild card this year, what do you think it might be?
Yeah. So it's mine is I feel like a bit of a fraud on this one because mine is a sort of a generally discussed thing, but definitely wild card, which is which parts of the US government are going to show up, right? There's a lot of talk that Trump will be there. People are literally planning their agendas around the day that they're expecting him to arrive and his delegation to arrive. And I think, what he's going to say and do and announce is definitely, the wild card that's top of mind for me.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And Yuito, I'll give this one to you. Davos is sometimes, criticized for being high on talk, low on actionable outcomes. If there's one thing you hope will be achieved at the annual meeting this year, what might that be?
Yeah. I personally look forward to Davos the moment I even scan through the session agenda. It's always a first signal of where conversations are really heading. I remember watching a session together with you, Tracy, next to each other 2 years ago, I think, Davos. And even then, it was quite interesting. It was clear that the topics on stage was already a prediction of what could happen a year later, right?
Yeah.
But what I hope that Davos 2026 really achieves is the same kind of step change we've seen before. Historically, Davos has been impactful when it moved from aspiration to action, as you mentioned. For example, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance launched in Davos back in 2000, was a simple but powerful mechanism of demand aggregation, vaccinated 1 billion children, I think, moved rapidly from pledge procurement, delivery, and fundamentally reshaped global vaccine markets and pricing, right? So in 2026, Davos, my hope is real capital movement commitments in the field of energy transition that I work on, but pilot transactions announced at Davos in energy grids, logistic corridors, digital public infrastructure in emerging markets. We wrote this in a resilience article partnership with the World Economic Forum recently. So these kind of initiatives are exactly how past Davos initiatives succeeded when commitments were, announced, actioned very soon after the Davos meeting. And I look forward to that this year.
Okay, fantastic. That brings us to time. Excuse me. That was a great discussion. Tracy and Yuito, thanks again for joining us today, and safe travels, both of you, to Switzerland.
Thank you so much, Lucia. Yuito, see you there.
Thank you. Very soon.
And as always, many thanks to all of you in our McKinsey Live audience today. You will be able to find a replay of this and our previous McKinsey Live sessions at mckinsey.com/live. We also have a dedicated landing page on mckinsey.com for Davos updates. You can access that via the links in the chat. And be sure to join our next McKinsey Live to find out what actually happened at Davos. We'll be back in a couple of weeks on Wednesday, January 28th, with McKinsey leaders and Davos delegates Shelley Stewart III and Becca Coggins to hear all about the highs and the lows, the woe, and the intrigue of the annual meeting on the mountaintop. You can register by scanning the QR code on screen. See you there. Have a great day or evening, and be well.